Wow, that was the highlight of the background of one of Africa's greatest son. Now, to further engage us in this conversation on the late President Kenneth Kaunda, I would like to go on to a guest of ours who we're having today. His name is Professor David Awarawo. He's a professor of international relations and strategic studies in the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. He is currently the head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies at University of Lagos. Professor Awarawo is an author of the award-winning doctoral thesis titled Diplomacy and Development of Equatorial Guinea, 1900 to 1990. He has published widely in areas of African politics and international relations. Professor, it is a pleasure to have you with us. We could go on reading for hours, but your achievement for hours, but thank you for being with us on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
All right, thank you. First of all, let's get started. The last of the Pan-African titans has just passed on. What does this entail for the future of African Pan-Africanism?
Well, the demise of Kenneth Kaunda last month and his burial a few days ago has created a huge vacuum. Okay. Like you mentioned, Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, Julius Nyerere, and Kenneth Kaunda himself, and a host of others were the pioneers of the struggle for independence for different African states, and also the pioneers in some sense, of Pan-Africanism on this end of the Atlantic. His death last month and his burial 2 days ago has created a vacuum, but it is for those left behind, the next generation, to continue in their ideals, such that Pan-Africanism will continue to occupy a center stage in Africa's political development, of course, with the objective of bringing Africans together and then, of course, for them to be able to assert themselves on the international space and of enhanced development on the continent as well.
Oh, okay, Prof. For a lot of young people out there who are the MTV and social media generation, they don't know much about some of these details. Could you please tell us a bit about his struggle for the independence of his country and his Pan-African struggle for the independence of the neighboring states around him?
Kenneth Kaunda was a giant. He went to prison a couple of times for his role in, trying to ensure that Zambia got independence. In fact, one of those novels we used to read in those days, with pleasure, is his work, Zambia Shall Be Free. And Zambia Shall Be Free was not just in theory, it was in practice. He was a member of different movements, different political parties, and the objective was how Zambia would secure independence. And eventually, he succeeded because he was the first post-independence president of Zambia. He wasn't content with that. He was like many others, like Kwame Nkrumah, who were convinced that the independence of their own countries would be incomplete until the last of the colonized territories in Africa became independent. And to that end, after Zambia's independence, he continued the independence struggle for the rest of Africa. And since South Africa is not far away, many of the frontline fighters for equality, for independence of South Africa, found a home in Zambia. He helped many members of the ANC, including Nelson Mandela and the rest of them, and he contributed tremendously to the eventual attainment of independence for South Africa and the establishment of multi-party democracy in 1994 in South Africa. So Kenneth Kaunda was not only a fighter for freedom and independence of Zambia, he was also a pillar, a giant in the liberation of the entire Africa, with particular focus on South Africa, where apartheid, held sway for a long time until 1994, when Mandela became the first, real president of South Africa.
All right. I'm going to ask, how is it? I mean, like we said, he is the last of a generation of titans who stood up against colonial rule and stood up and pushed the idea of Pan-Africanism. And it seems like some of the best of the leaders are gone. What can we draw from the lessons of this man's life and the life of those in his generation? And how can we inculcate that into this present generation and the upcoming generation to ensure that the best of African leadership is not behind her?
Well, several things, but I'll focus on three. First is the commitment to Pan-Africanism, that is commitment to African unity. There is no way Africa will be able to attain its optimal development if individual African states continue on their own or go on their own to try to get the best from the international community. So Africa needs to come together as one. That was realized by Kenneth Kaunda and the rest of them, Kwame Nkrumah and the rest of them. They were convinced of the fact that each individual territory of Africa or state of Africa will be unable to, attain its optimum if it goes on its own, on the international stage. Because whether we like it or not, Africa is extensively fragmented. And so that ideal of Pan-Africanism, Africans must come together to identify, with one another, identify their common problems and present a common front to the global community. It's one thing that Kenneth Kaunda and the rest of them stood for. And that is what must continue to define the way Africans conduct themselves in contemporary times. It is true there could be rivalry here and there, each state will pursue its own national interest. But beyond that, this current generation needs to realize the fact that Africa cannot attain its optimal level of development, and African dignity cannot be achieved in its proper sense and context, except and until Pan-Africanism, gains momentum, is given, wider prominence, and the way these, leaders, early leaders like Kaunda, Kwame Nkrumah, and the rest of them did. That's one. Second is selflessness. One of the problems Africa has now is this commitment to self, narrow interest and all. There is a need to see beyond, the self to promoting the common good. The time African leaders begin to focus on the common good over and beyond, the self, that is when Africa will begin to actually, attain development and catch up with the rest of the world. That is second. And of course, third, the need to focus on the important things, the things that, will promote and develop Africa, adopting the right policies, and of course, measuring up with what is the development in the global context, science and technology and the rest of them, and all of this. Those are things that we can learn from Kenneth Kaunda and his generation. And if this current generation follows that path, then, as we say, their labor will not be in vain.
Fantastic. Just because we're out of time, but just one more question. Now, this is the legacy they have bequeathed us, Pan-Africanism. How do we sustain that in today's Africa with a very different generation? How do we sustain that to ensure that the benefits, as you've mentioned, of Pan-Africanism is fully harvested?
Well, the African Union has a great role to play in this. It's a matter of enlightened self-interest for African leaders to be committed to Pan-Africanism, because there is no individual African state that can on its own, go to the international community and attain the optimum. It's not possible. Africa is fragmented, and the only way Africans can hold their own, on the international at the international level is for Africans to come together. So the African Union has a role to play. The African Union recognizes that. The African Union has a role to play to make African leaders recognize the fact that it is a matter of enlightened self-interest for Africans to unite, to be able to project themselves on at the international level. These days, diplomatic power is important. How much you can negotiate on the global scale is important to your internal development. And Africans must unite in this regard to be able to achieve that. And of course, as I said before, focus on the common good. That is important. Of course, they had their flaws as well. Kenneth Kaunda had his flaws.
Yes.
His party was a one-party state for quite some time.
Yes.
He was not committed to democratic values for quite some time. So there are flaws we must learn from.
Yeah.
We must learn from their flaws, and of course, focus on those things they also did right, such as commitment to the common good, Pan-Africanism, and the rest of them. When we do that, then the legacies of these frontline and immediate post-independence leaders of Africa will then be sustained by the current generation.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was an absolute pleasure and an enlightening moment speaking with you. We hope to have you on the program again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on from African politics, we'll take a break right now, and when we come back, the show continues.